The snow fell in slow, whispering sheets, blanketing the city park in a hush so deep it seemed sacred. Street lights flickered above the frost-laced branches, their golden glow softening the edges of benches and trash cans, painting halos in the falling snow. Everything was still, save for the occasional gust of wind that danced through the empty swing sets and scattered brittle leaves along the frozen path. Claire sat hunched on a bench near the edge of the path, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. Her coat was too thin, her scarf forgotten somewhere in a cab or conference room. She had not planned a walk. She had not planned for any of this. Her phone was gone. So was her wallet somewhere between the boardroom where she had argued with 7 older men about how compassion could be profitable and the sidewalk where the taxi never came. Her whole sense of control had slipped through her fingers. Her cheeks burned red from fever. Her breath came fast and shallow. She blinked slowly, the edges of the world blurring. Everything felt distant, like she was watching herself from the other side of a thick pane of glass. The city was still awake around her, but it was no longer paying attention. Claire's fingers trembled in her lap. She leaned back against the bench, her vision swimming. She felt something drip from her nose and wasn't sure if it was a tear or the beginning of a nosebleed. The snow fell harder now, clinging to her lashes. Not far away, Jack was pulling his son along the path, their steps slow and careful. Eli, only 6, yawned against his shoulder. The boy's hat was too big, his coat 2 sizes too small, but he never complained. They had done this before, circling the blocks, staying in motion until they were sure which door to sleep behind. Jack had planned to return to the warehouse across the street. It was dry there. At least quiet, safe enough for one more night. But then he saw her, a girl, young, maybe early 30s, sitting stiff and small on the bench. Her body folded in on itself like someone trying to disappear. Her boots were soaked through, her fingers had gone pale, shaking against her coat. Her head tipped to the side, slightly unfocused eyes staring at nothing. Jack stopped walking. I looked up at him sleepily. Dad? He did not answer right away. He looked again. There was something about her, fragile, raw. Not someone pretending. Not someone looking for attention, someone who was actually not okay. Stay here, he whispered to Eli, helping the boy sit on the edge of the bench beside a patch of dry snow. Jack stepped closer. Miss? She did not respond. He crouched gently, touching her shoulder. She flinched. Barely. Want to thank you for joining me, but her eyes did not meet his. Miss? Are you okay? Still nothing. She was burning up. He could feel the heat radiating from her skin even through her coat. Her lips were starting to turn a dusky blue. Jack looked at Eli, who was already watching him with wide, tired eyes. We can share, right? Jack said softly. The boy nodded without another word. Jack unzipped his coat, the only one he owned, and slid it off. He draped it over Claire's shaking body, careful not to jostle her. Then he pulled off the thin, fraying blanket that Eli had carried, tucked into their backpack all evening. It smelled of smoke and salt, but it was warm. He wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, tucking it tightly, brushing the snow from her hair. She's sick, Eli said quietly. Jack nodded, yeah. He looked down at the girl again. Her eyes fluttered, barely open, just long enough to see the blurred shape of a man kneeling before her, tucking a blanket around her like it mattered. And then she passed out, her body going limp. Jack sat back on his heels and looked around. No cabs, no pedestrians, just snow and silence. He pulled out his phone, a burner that barely held charge, and dialed 911. We need help, he said. There's a woman. She's freezing. She's burning up. Please. As he waited, he adjusted the blanket again. Eli climbed into his lap, shivering against the wind. Jack looked at his son and whispered, we can take the cold. But she can't. He did not know her name. He did not know where she came from or what she had lost. Then he had no idea that the building he would return to that night, the one with the cracked windows and broken locks, belonged to the very girl he had just covered with his coat. But that did not matter now, because in that moment, she was just someone who needed saving. He still remembered what it felt like to be the one nobody saw. The first thing Claire noticed was the quiet, no wind, no snow, no ache in her bones from the cold, just warmth, soft light, the slow distant beep of machines. She opened her eyes to a ceiling that was too bright and too white to be anything but a hospital. Her body felt heavy but not in pain. Her mouth was dry, her limbs still tingling from the frost. When she tried to sit up, the motion pulled a soft gasp from her throat. A nurse appeared almost instantly, middle-aged, kind-eyed, already reaching to adjust her pillows. "You're safe," the nurse said gently. "Try not to move too fast. You've had a high fever and some minor hypothermia." Claire blinked. "Throat trauma? How?" "A man found you passed out in the park. He brought you in, stayed just long enough to make sure you were stable. Then he left. Didn't leave a name. Just this." She reached into her pocket and handed Claire a small slip of paper. Creased and slightly damp. The handwriting was rough, uneven, clearly hurried. "Check your brakes. Rest." Claire stared at the words for a long time. She knew that handwriting not from memory, but from the moment just before everything went black. The coat, the blanket, the warm hand brushing snow from her hair. The man with the kind eyes. "Do you have security footage? A name? Anything?" she asked, voice thin with urgency. The nurse shook her head. "Sorry, Han. He didn't come in through the ER entrance, dropped you off through the side access. Flagged a paramedic. Then gone." Claire leaned back against the pillow, her thoughts spinning even faster than her pulse. She had no name, no face beyond the blurred memory, just a scrap of paper and the feeling that someone had saved her life and disappeared like smoke. Hours passed. Doctors checked her vitals. Nurses came and went. She answered questions about allergies and medications. But inside, her mind was still in that park, the snow, the hands, oh, the voice that night. Discharged with antibiotics and a warning to rest, Claire stepped out into the cold again, but this time wrapped in a hospital-issued coat and a mystery that would not let her go. She called her assistant the next morning to ask if anyone had turned in her phone or wallet. They had not. But she could not stop thinking about that man. He could have walked away. He could have ignored her, like everyone else had that night. Instead, he gave her warmth. He stayed long enough to make sure she was safe. He had nothing to gain, no reason to help, and that haunted her. At work, her mind wandered. During meetings, her eyes drifted to the window, scanning the streets below for a face she barely remembered. She had power, resources, yet she had no idea how to find a man who had slipped out of her life as quietly as he had entered it. She took a walk near the park a few nights later, retracing her steps, same bench, same path, but no sign of him. She sat there for a while, holding the note in her gloved hand, reading it again and again, like it might change if she stared long enough. "Check your brakes. Rest." The words made no real sense, but the sentiment did. She began asking around carefully. She stopped at the food bank down the street from the old warehouse her company had purchased for redevelopment. She asked if any volunteers had seen a man with a young boy, maybe sleeping rough. She described his voice, his quietness, his kindness, but no one knew him. She even went to the old building itself. She had not been there since the acquisition paperwork. It was a ghost of a place, cracked bricks, windows covered in grime, graffiti along the outer wall. Still, something told her he had passed through here. Claire lingered at the front entrance, pressing her hand lightly to the rusted handle. She did not know who he was, but she knew how he had made her feel seen, protected, human, in a world that judged people by title and status and worth. This man, this stranger, "Why, what thank you for joining me," had simply seen a woman in the snow and decided she mattered enough to help. She tucked the paper back into her coat pocket and whispered to the empty air, "Thank you." Even if she never found him again, she would carry that moment, that warmth. But something deep in her bones told her it was not over. Not yet. The warehouse stood at the edge of a forgotten district, its red bricks weathered by decades of wind and rain, long since abandoned. It had been purchased in a quiet deal by Claire's development firm. It was supposed to be the site of a future community hub, a vision Claire had pitched, argued for, and finally won just weeks before everything unraveled. But the building had not waited for permits and contractors. It had already become someone's shelter. Jack had found the place months ago, hidden behind rusted gates and thick vines. The back entrance led to a dry, unfinished basement, no insulation, no heat, but for solid walls and a concrete floor that did not leak. For Jack and his son Eli, it was enough. They made it livable. At least by their standards. Jack had laid cardboard along the floor and stacked crates to hold clothes and books. A single camping lantern provided light at night. Their few possessions were organized with care, a toothbrush and a cup, the small notebook filled with Eli's drawings, and a folded flannel blanket. Patched but clean. Jack kept it spotless. He swept the floor daily with a piece of worn broom. He wiped down the walls with rags, and boiled water over a portable camping stove when he could. He made sure Eli washed, studied, and felt, at least within these walls, some sense of normal. He told Eli it was temporary, that things would change, that they were safe. And for a while, that was true, but jobs had grown scarcer. His last part-time gig at a repair shop had dried up. The manager said they could not afford the liability. No ID, no address, no payroll. Then Eli got sick. It started with a cough, then a fever. Jack pressed a hand to his son's forehead one morning and felt the heat burning under his skin. He rationed their food, skipped his own meals to keep Eli hydrated, but when he went to the drugstore with what little cash he had left, it was not enough. Cough syrup, painkillers, the antibiotics, everything was out of reach. He stood at the pharmacy counter, holding the bottle in one hand and a crumpled $5 bill in the other, knowing it would not even cover half. He walked out empty-handed. Back in the basement, Eli curled beneath the blanket, cheeks flushed, voice faint. "Dad, can you tell me the story again?" he whispered. Jack knelt beside him, brushing his damp hair back. "Which one?" "The one where the night finds the warm place." Jack closed his eyes and began to speak. Meanwhile, across town, Claire stared at the building plans laid out across her desk. Something tugged at her. A strange unease. She had not visited the site in person since her recovery, but something told her she should. So that afternoon, she drove out alone. The exterior of the warehouse was the same as she remembered, faded, silent. But as she moved closer to the side entrance, something caught her attention, a faint trail of footprints in the dust near the door. Recent, small. She keyed in the padlock code and pulled open the door. Inside, the air smelled faintly of smoke and fabrics off in a rod. She walked carefully down the narrow stairs into the basement and froze. There were boxes neatly arranged, a mattress, a blanket folded with care, a chipped bowl freshly washed, and in the far corner, barely lit by a battery-powered lantern, a man crouched over a child. The boy was wrapped in a blanket, his face flushed with fever. The man looked up, startled, instinctively placing himself between her and the child. Claire took a step back, stunned, but then their eyes met. It was him, the coat, the quiet, the kindness, the man from the park. The man who had saved her life. They stared at each other for a long moment. Claire's voice was soft, disbelieving. "It's you." Jack said nothing, his expression guarded. Claire looked past him at the child. "Your son?" Jack nodded. "He's sick," she said gently. "Yes." She didn't hesitate. "I'm taking you to the hospital." He started to protest, but the look in her eyes stopped him. "I owe you," she said simply. Jack did not argue again. He gathered Eli in his arms, the boy barely stirring. Claire led them both up the stairs and out into the light. As they crossed the threshold, Jack paused and turned to her. "This building, it's yours?" Claire looked back at the doorway. "Yes." He looked down, shame flickering in his eyes. "We didn't mean to trespass. We had nowhere else." She interrupted. "You gave me your only blanket," she said. "You can stay as long as you need." And with that, they disappeared into the falling snow. This time not as strangers. The fluorescent lights in the emergency room made everything feel sharper, more real. Jack sat on a hard plastic bench near the triage doors, his hands clasped tightly together, eyes fixed on the swinging curtains that hid Eli from view. Claire sat beside him, silent, her coat draped over her knees, her face calm but unreadable. 20 minutes ago, they had been strangers again, her walking into her own building, him crouched on the floor beside his burning son, caught mid-sentence, trying to soothe the fever with a rag soaked in cold tap water. When she had stepped into the basement and gasped, Jack had risen in an instant. shielding Eye with his body like a wild animal cornered. Claire had not flinched. She had walked straight to the boy, dropped to her knees, and touched his forehead. Then, without waiting for permission, she had ordered them into her car. Now outside, in the sterile hospital corridor, neither of them spoke. The moment felt too raw, too strange to fill with words. Finally, the curtain rustled and a nurse stepped out. His fever's coming down. Flu. Maybe a touch of pneumonia. We've started fluids and antibiotics. You got him here just in time. Jack's body slumped, every bone releasing tension at once. He covered his face with his hands, then sat back, eyes glassy. Thank you, he whispered. Claire nodded once. They were quiet again until I was moved to a recovering room. Claire paid the hospital charges without a second thought, brushing off Jack's quiet protests with a wave of her hand. You saved my life, she said. This is nothing. She did not explain what she meant. Not yet. When they left, it was past midnight. The snow had stopped. The streets were quiet again. Claire opened the passenger door of her car and helped Jack ease Eli inside. The boy was bundled in a clean blanket, already drifting back to sleep. Claire drove. No one asked where to, they both knew. When they reached the warehouse, Claire pulled into the narrow side lot, headlights cutting across cracked brick and chain-link fence. She turned off the engine and let the silence sit for a moment. Jack turned to her slowly. I didn't know this place was yours, he said. We weren't trying to take it. We just needed somewhere for a little while. Claire looked over at him. The lines on his face were tired but soft, not the face of someone trying to steal. Just someone trying to survive. I know, she said. You kept it cleaner than most of my rentals. Jack chuckled once, but it died quickly. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small folded piece of paper, and handed it to her. Claire took it, eyebrows raised. It was the note, the one from her hospital coat pocket. Check your brakes. Rest. Claire blinked. I never thought I'd see you again, she said, voice low. I didn't think you'd remember. I didn't think you'd recognize me, she added. Jack looked away, then back at her. I didn't nod at first. Not until I saw your face under the hospital lights. It hit me then. Claire leaned back in her seat, exhaling slowly. So, Jack said, trying to break the tension. I guess this makes you the landlord. Huh? I suppose it does, she replied. He paused. The girl on the bench. She nodded. They sat there for another long moment. You never asked for help, he said quietly. I didn't have to, she answered. You gave it anyway. He looked at her, eyes serious. I didn't have anything to give. Claire turned her head, met his gaze full on. You had the only blanket you owned. That silenced him. Eli stirred softly in the back seat, letting out a quiet sigh. Claire reached for the handle, pushed the door open. You're not going back into that basement, she said. You're coming home with me for now until we figure something out. Jack opened his mouth to protest, but the look she gave him left no room for argument. It was not pity. It was gratitude and something else, respect. He nodded slowly. Okay, he said. Claire looked once more at the warehouse, then back at him. This building wasn't being used. You did something better with it than I would have. Jack watched her for a moment, then whispered. You saved us tonight. She smiled faintly. You started it. And with that, they pulled away from the place that had sheltered their silence and headed towards something neither of them had ever expected to find, the beginning of something whole. The sound of a hammer echoed through the hallway, rhythmic and sure. Jack stood near the front entrance of the old warehouse, now stripped of its clutter and shadows. He was fitting a new frame to the door, sleeves rolled up, sawdust in his hair. His movements were patient, focused, the kind of work that required your whole body and none of your past. Eli sat nearby on a crate, crayons spread around him like a burst of color. The boy had claimed a patch of drywall by the stair wall and was turning it into a mural, a row of trees, a yellow sun, a small blue house with smoke curling from the chimney. Claire stood at a distance, watching them both. For the first time in weeks, her breath felt easy. She had made the offer that morning over black coffee and leftover toast. You can stay, she said. Help me fix it up. Make it more than just a building. Jack hesitated. You don't have to do this. I know, she replied. But I want to. And now here they were. Jack mended broken steps and repaired wiring. Claire called in permits and ordered supplies. Eli painted with the fierce concentration of a 6-year-old who finally had a wall of his own. They moved like 3 separate notes of the same song, never in perfect harmony, but never discordant. In the evenings, they sat around a folding table lit by a single overhead bulb, sharing food and quiet conversation. It became a ritual, as natural as brushing off snow from their boots at the door. No one asked what came before. Claire never pressed about the nights Jack and Eli had spent in shelters or basements. Jack never asked why someone like Claire, sharp, efficient, always in motion, had ended up passed out in a city park with no one to call. But one night, as they sat over stew and cracked bread, the silence opened just enough for truth to pass through. Claire leaned back in her chair, cradling her mug. My parents died when I was 21, she said softly. Car accident. I just started working in acquisitions. My father wanted me to go into law. My mother wanted me to get married. Instead, I buried them both and took over a business I barely understood. Jack looked up but said nothing. I've been running ever since. Boardrooms, airports, spreadsheets. There's always been motion but never arrival. She smiled. Not bitter, just tired. This is the first place I've come to that doesn't ask me for anything. Jack stared at his hands for a moment, then said, You've built something good here. Claire shook her head. I didn't build anything. You did. You and Eli. Eli want to thank you for joining me. Half asleep in his chair, murmured something about paint and toast. Jack chuckled. They fell into silence again, but this time it felt full, not empty. At night, Claire stood in what used to be the main storeroom, now cleaned, with windows washed and insulation tacked to the walls. It would be a classroom someday. Or maybe a reading lounge, she didn't know. For now, what to say to you for joining me? It was just space, breathable space. She ran her fingers along the frame of the window, looking out at the city's dull amber glow. Behind her, Jack entered quietly, carrying a warm blanket and a new pillow. Found these at the shelter downtown. Thought you might want something softer than plywood. She smiled. Thank you. He sat them down, not looking at her. Claire, he said after a pause. I don't know how to say this without sounding like I want more than I should. She turned, eyebrows raised. I'm grateful, he said simply, for everything. You don't owe me anything. I know, I want to thank you for joining me, he said, but I'm still grateful. She stepped closer. So am I. They stood in the unfinished room, with its exposed beams and bare walls. And for a brief moment, it felt like the most complete space in the world. That night, Claire lay in bed, listening to the sound of Eli's laughter drifting down the hall. Jack was teaching him how to flip a pancake without ruining the ceiling, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like a guest in her own life. She felt like she had come home. The article ran on a Sunday, page 4 of the local paper, but it spread faster online. Developer turns abandoned building into community center. Partners with former homeless father. The photo showed Claire standing outside the newly painted warehouse, now with a banner that read The Haven Project. Beside her stood Jack, arms folded, looking reluctant but steady. In front of them, Eli grinned beneath a fresh coat of paint smudged across his shirt. The story praised their efforts to create a free space for after-school tutoring, job training, and weekend meals. It told of how the building had been transformed with love, sweat, and very little money. It also mentioned briefly that Claire's company had funded the initial investment and that she had stepped away from traditional development models to pursue impact-driven change. That last part did not go over well. By Monday morning, her inbox was full, not with praise, but concern. The board summoned her for a meeting. Claire stood at the head of the long conference table, wearing a tailored blazer over a shirt that still smelled faintly of sawdust. Across from her sat 5 men and 2 women, people she had known for years, people who had watched her climb every rung of the corporate ladder. They did not look pleased. You've been using company assets for personal philanthropy, one said, flipping the article across the table. I disclosed every cent, Claire replied evenly. You didn't disclose naming a man with no financial background as your co-creditor. He helped build it. He lives it. And what about your personal relationship with him? Claire's hands curled slightly at her sides. Irrelevant. Another board member leaned forward. Voice careful, Claire. This is not about the project itself, it's about optics. Investors wants table leadership. Your decisions have been unconventional. Claire stared at the polished table. She could see her own reflection there, sharp, small, framed by walls she had once built herself. What exactly are you asking me? She said finally. The head of the board looked at her with a tired smile. We think it would be best if you stepped back, take an indefinite leave. Let us assign interim management while you refocus. There it was, the polite way of being pushed out. Claire let the silence stretch for a moment before answering. I see. She reached for her folder, tucking the article inside it. Then she looked up. Calm, clear. I'll step down, but not to refocus. I'm stepping down because I made a promise to a 6-year-old who gave me a crayon drawing when he had nothing else. And to his father who handed me a coat in a snowstorm without knowing my name. The room shifted. Uncomfortable. They gave me trust when I had lost everything. And I'd rather lose this office than break that. She pushed her chair back and stood. I choose them. The board did not argue. They only watched as she turned and walked away, her heels echoing down the marble hallway like a closing chapter. Outside, the sky was gray with winter clouds. Claire pulled her coat tighter and called a car. By the time she returned to the warehouse, the Haven, as they called it now, I was drawing stick figures on the calpboard wall. And Jack was fixing a leaky pipe beneath the kitchen sink. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. Jack looked up. You're early, he said. I quit, she replied. Eli perked up. You got fired? Claire laughed softly. Kind of. Jack stood, wiping his hands on a towel. What happened? She walked over, opened the drawer beside the fridge, and placed the article there carefully. The world noticed, she said, and they didn't like it. Jack frowned. I'm sorry. Don't be. I'm not. He studied her, cautious. Are you sure? She nodded. I chose this. I chose us. He stared at her for a long moment, then said, You're kind of a terrible businesswoman. She smiled. Maybe. But I'm getting better at being a human. And as Eli danced around the room, singing about pancakes and superheroes, the woman who once lived in spreadsheets and silence sat down at a handmade table beside a man who had once slept beneath the floor. And neither of them looked back. The grand opening of the Haven drew more people than anyone expected, not because there were balloons or television crews or big speeches, there were none of those. But because word had spread person to person that something different was happening in that old warehouse. A hot meal. No questions asked. A warm place to sit in winter. Free tutoring. Legal aid once a week. Even job referrals through Claire's still intact network. There were showers. Clean clothes. The bulletin board covered in hopeful scribbles. Need a room. Looking for evening work. Free haircuts on Thursdays. Jack handled logistics, plumbing, deliveries, repairs. He moved through the building with quiet efficiency, like it had always belonged to him. Claire managed people, volunteers, schedules, permits. She was the face when needed, the spine when it mattered. They rarely spoke about what they were not to each other, not to anyone else. They simply lived. Claire had the loft space above the old storage office, now a corner they had renovated into a small apartment. Jack and Eli had a similar space across the hall. The doors were never locked. Dinners were usually shared. Eli bounced between both sides like a bridge that no longer knew where it started. People noticed. Of course. Volunteers saw the way Claire's hand lingered on Jack's shoulder when she passed him tools, or how Jack instinctively stepped between her and any raised voice, even when the threat was only frustration. But no one asked. The bond was quiet but unshakable, like steel beneath worn wood. One night, as snow dusted the edges of the city again, Claire tucked herself into the corner of the communal reading nook. Eli was fast asleep on the beanbag beside her. Jack was fixing a light fixture above the coat rack. The local girl strummed a guitar by the window. The hum of safety wrapped around them. Claire reached for a book, opened it, then paused. Mom, a main deck stackway bonds. Eli mumbled, still half asleep, turning over and pressing his face into her side. The word landed like a bell rung from somewhere deep and old. She froze. It was not the first time a child had called her something by mistakes he had mentored, fostered, donated, but this wasn't a slip. It was a whisper wrapped in trust. Tears rose before she could stop them. She looked down at the boy's face, warm, peaceful. "I want to thank you for joining me." Safin let the tears fall silently, threading through her smile like light through rain. Jack must have seen. He was suddenly there, crouched beside her, his hand resting gently over hers. He did not speak. He didn't have to. His touch said everything, that she could let it in. That it was real. That she didn't have to be anything but who she was right here, in this space they had built from ash and cold and second chances. She squeezed his fingers lightly. Outside, the city moved on fast, distracted, unknowing. Inside, in that warm room filled with mismatched chairs and second-hand books, the woman who once had no place to belong sat with a boy who called her mother and a man who never asked her to be more than what she already was. And for the first time in her life, Claire felt like she didn't need to prove anything. She already had everything she needed, not walls, not signatures, not titles, just this. A home. The haven was quiet but not silent. Soft music floated from the back room. Someone was tuning a guitar for that evening's open mic. Volunteers were stringing paper lanterns across the rafters of Hebraeans across the rafters. The scent of cinnamon bread drifted from the kitchen, warm and familiar. Claire stood in the main hall, hands clasped behind her back, staring at the photo display along the far wall. They had called it Moments of Grace, dozens of snapshots. Some candid, some staged, capturing the transformation of the building, the early days of sanding floors, the mural Eli had painted, the laughter of strangers turned friends. But the final frame, centered under a soft spotlight, was different, a single image of a park bench in winter. Its slats dusted with snow, draped over one arm was a worn, fraying blanket, gray, thin, barely warm enough to cover a child. Claire had taken the photo herself, months after that night. She had returned to the park, unsure why, and found the bench exactly as she remembered it, empty. Waiting. She had stood there for a long time, then lifted her camera and captured the place where everything changed. Beside the photo, mounted on a small wooden plaque, was a short inscription. "He gave what little he had and gave me a reason to stay." People stopped when they reached that photo. Some tilted their heads. Some smiled softly. A few brushed away ears. No one asked questions. Jack approached from behind, his footsteps slow and steady. In his hands, he held something wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Claire turned to him, brows raised in curiosity. "For you, and thank you for joining me," he said. She opened the package carefully. Inside was a small hand-carved frame. The wood was rough around the edges, imperfect. Beautiful. Within it, behind a pane of glass, was a single folded piece of paper, the note, the one she had found in her coat pocket after waking up in the hospital. His handwriting, slanted and unsure, stared back at her. Rest. Claire's breath caught. She looked up at Jack, eyes shining. "You kept it." He nodded. "Made a copy the next day. Figured you might want to remember." She swallowed hard. "I never forgot." Jack glanced toward the photo of the bench. "Neither did I." Behind them, Eli's voice echoed from the main room. "Hey, they're starting the slideshow." Claire smiled and took Jack's hand. They walked together to the front of the hall, where a row of mismatched chairs faced a makeshift projector screen. Eli waved at them excitedly from the middle row, saving to seats with his coat. They sat, one on each side of him, no fanfare, no stage, just the three of them in the glow of shared purpose and quiet love. The slideshow began. Photos flickered across the screen, children painting, a volunteer hugging an elderly man, a teenager reading a poem. Every image told a story of small, brave kindness. And in the middle row, under the soft amber light, the boy rested his head on the shoulder of the woman who had once collapsed in the snow. On her other side sat the man who had knelt beside her without asking for her name. They had no legal titles, no wedding rings, no blood connection, but everyone in that room, without needing it said, knew the truth. They were a family. And it had all started with one cold night and a single, worn blanket. If this story moved you, Even just a little, if it reminded you that the smallest act of kindness can change the entire course of someone's life, then let it live on in your heart. Sometimes, love does not arrive with grand gestures but with a quiet blanket on a cold bench. A whispered word. A steady hand. And sometimes, the family we find is even stronger than the one we're born into. If you want more stories like this true, touching, and soul-stirring, subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories channel. Give this video a like, and share it with someone who still believes in the quiet power of compassion. Because every story we tell might be the story someone else needs to hear. We'll see you in the next one.